life interaction. I think everything that's online in terms of learning a sign language and assessing a sign language cannot be moved online also in the future. So if I would be in the situation to say, so what you want to keep, what you want to go back to, I think it will be a mix of both. It will be definitely more online, that's for sure. But learning a language that uses space, it has a different meaning if I locate a sign here or more towards my own body. It's very difficult when you have just 2D on your screen. We can tell now about our students that are learning, or people learning a sign language now only online. It has a lot of disadvantages. I personally believe in that it will be a balanced mix of both scenarios. Something that's online, that's using a lot of artificial intelligence, answer force, machine learning. On the other side will be also what we can do, yes, in real life back then. So what we are doing, what we are planning to do, that's me, two colleagues, Franz Holzknecht and Wolfgang Mann. We're also planning a survey and actually trying to document the experience people made during the pandemic now in sign language teaching and assessment, to see what we can use also in the future in a good way. Not only because we had to, I mean, everybody has, it means a learning curve in the last 12 months are for everyone, I guess, very, very steep. So this is, yeah, that's something we want to document and to see how we can actually use it also in the future, or to say, okay, look, that's something we should do maybe on site at a university in reality. On that, something we definitely can keep online, for example. Yeah. So, oh wow, this was fast. I guess, hang on. I guess I would have another video, but I actually don't know how to play it. So thank you. That's the sign for thank you. So that's it. Then I hand over the floor for questions.
Thank you very much. That is absolutely amazing. Really, really interesting. AI for sign language assessment. Wow, that blows my mind. I think that's really incredible. So thank you very much. So we do have 5 minutes for any questions or comments. If you'd like to say something, please raise your hand or type something into the chat now. Please do that so we can make best use of these 5 minutes. I think there are a couple of people typing by the looks of it. Do raise your hand if you want to say something. There is a hand that's come up. So, Olivia, could you bring that person on?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
It's a very interesting presentation. It's a very interesting technology for the future. Now, I'm just thinking about, it seems to me, in my experience with sign languages in the virtual space, they put some restrictions on what the signing space, signing room, and also obviously the interaction in the same manner as spoken languages, but perhaps even more so with sign languages. And I'm just wondering if you have any sort of reflections on if both the use of digital tools for teaching and for assessing sign language could have any effects on practices. And I'm thinking particularly about lesser used sign languages and minoritized languages where sort of standardization of languages may be more easily influenced by these practices, and also the perceptions of correctness, so to speak. That's my thought.
The audio quality was not that good, so I'm not entirely sure if I understood everything. So you are asking about other tools and discussion?
Yeah, so it sounded like the digital tools that exist for speaking assessment and learning, can they be applied to sign language assessment and learning? I think that's the question.
Can you hear me now? Is this
much better? Much better.
Okay. Is it time to ask the question again, or?
Yes, just quickly repeat it. Yes, quickly repeat it, sure.
So I'm just wondering about my experience with sign languages in the digital space. Is that it affects obviously the way that one speaks, but because it restricts the signing room, the space in which you can pronounce signs, and also interaction. And because sign languages, especially lesser used sign languages, are more minoritized and more vulnerable, maybe.
Definitely.
I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how teaching, the teaching and assessment of sign languages in digital tools could impact both standardization processes and perceptions of correctness.
Yes, definitely. That's a very good question. I mean, one thing is on the use of sign languages, for example, in Zoom meetings, I just read about a study how deaf people adjust their signing styles because of the 2-dimension. The other things, that's a very valid point, and actually we are having still ongoing discussion on that. I was just saying we created a very simple vocabulary size test where learners see a German word and they need to provide the Swiss German sign language sign. And they are very basic concepts at level A1. And the interesting part about when is a sign correct and when is it not incorrect. And basically we collect the data from native signers, deaf people, and from learners. And then we try to create in the linguistic analysis categories, which ones would be more acceptable, feeding into a criterion of correctness, and the other one saying this is not acceptable. And this was very interesting because we came up with 6 or 7 categories, and 4 of them would be considered the sign as correct, and the other one is incorrect. And we're still in this discussion, and I'm very aware about it. It's a very sensible issues because me as a hearing researcher working in this field, the other issue is really sign language don't have a written form. They are less standardized. Then a lot of video, I think, has had more impact on it. But I think it's still an ongoing discussion, and we will have this discussion ongoing now on the sentence level. We have it on the single sign level. Yeah. And I think we need to be very cautious about it because it's not only a linguistic issue where at some point I would say, look, we need to come to a conclusion to say this is for purely summative context, this is not right or wrong or partial right or wrong. But also because as you were saying, it's a minoritized languages and there's a lot of pressure on this language and those languages. So it's a very sensitive issue. Thanks for raising the question.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thanks very much, Tobias. Thank you for that question. We have unfortunately now come to the end of our time for this session. Please do catch Tobias if you have further questions. I think there might have been 1 or 2 other hands that I couldn't get to within this time. So there we go. Sorry about that. Tobias, thank you again. Thank you. And we look forward to the future of this really fascinating area of language assessment. So thanks very much.
Sure.
Great, so we go on now. We've just got a few minutes to change rooms if you want to. So stay in this room for fair and just arrangements for dyslexic test takers. I'm staying here, I want to hear about that. If you speak Spanish, then go into room 1. Unfortunately, no hablo español, so I'm not going into room 1. And room 2 for working towards positive washback, aligning mediation assessment tasks to the CFR. So see you in a few moments.
Hello again. This is just a reminder that we now have sessions starting in the main stage, room 1 and room 2 at 11:15. So you have 2 minutes to make your choices and move to the appropriate room. In the main stage, we have fair and just arrangements for dyslexic test takers. In room 1, we have Marta Garcia presenting, and in room 2, we have working towards positive washback. So please make your way to either the main stage, room 1, or room 2, ready for the next sessions, which will begin in 2 minutes. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Just 1 minute to go. Great, good. Hello, Hannah. Hello, Stina.
Hello.
Oh,
Lovely. We can hear you fine. Fantastic. So it's 11:15 in Norway, I think. It's 10:15 here in the UK. So we're ready to start the next session, which is fair and just arrangements for dyslexic test takers. Oh,
Actually, that's not the right presentation.
that's not the right presentation. So Olivia, stage manager, can we find the right presentation, please? So we just hang on a minute. I think it's coming. Hannah, Stina, while we're waiting, do you just want to introduce yourselves?
Yes, why not? My name is Stina Sörli. Yeah, should I introduce you to Hanna or you? Okay, this is Hanna Leivik, my colleague. We work for Skills Norway. And yeah, one of our main tasks in our job is to ensure that special needs candidates have an equal opportunity as everyone else to access good quality tests. And in the meantime, maybe I can also say that to those who showed up for our workshop yesterday, we apologize for the problems with the sound and the discussion groups. Hopefully we are better equipped today to get our message through.
There we go. Good. So yes, there's your presentation. Wonderful. So I'll now properly hand over to you, Stina, to begin this session. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Graham. All right, so just a second. Yeah, today we'll talk about special arrangements for dyslexic test takers in reading and writing tests. Due to the COVID pandemic, we know that more tests have been digitalized and or are in the process of being digitalized, and this might actually offer some possibilities for making better arrangement for special needs candidates, as we see it. So yeah, today there is an array of different assistive technology tools that people use in their everyday life. Some are integrated in standard computer software. Some are tailored for specific needs, but are nonetheless easily accessible as freestanding applications. But which of these tools to offer for special needs in a language test, if any, is a very difficult question. Our presentation then will focus on Skills Norway's process of amending the test regulations for dyslexic test takers. The process is not yet completed and there are more questions than answers, but we do hope that by sharing some of the questions and concerns that we've come across so far, it could prove useful to others working with special arrangements in digital tests as well. So if I could have the next slide, please. Right. I think it's actually the previous slide. If you could jump back one, I think. Yeah, good, perfect. So last year, we were instructed by the Norwegian Ministry of Education to do test trials of digital tools for dyslexic candidates. Several stakeholders had been pushing for a change on behalf of these candidates, implying that special arrangements offered up until then were not letting candidates with dyslexia show their full language potential in tests, and that digital assistive technology tools should be allowed. We conducted a test arrangement for adult candidates with dyslexia. In these trials, the candidates were offered to use assistive technology tools on the tests, but these were mock tests and the results did not appear on the candidate certificates. Next slide, please. Thank you. We set up the trials at all the adult education centers across the country. Each candidate took 2 reading tests and 2 writing tests, one of each with and without assistive technology tools. The idea was to compare the test results and see how the assistive technology tools might contribute to a higher score or result on the tests. And our instructions were to test the digital tools on candidates who had documentation of dyslexia. This proved very challenging, and we learned that most of second language learners with dyslexia have little or no chance to get a proper documentation of their disadvantage. Teachers informed us about many candidates who most likely had dyslexia, but for various reasons were lacking the documentation. The main issue is that schools and skilled personnel simply lack the right tools or advanced training to make a diagnosis of dyslexia for second language learners. One consequence of that on our side was that we didn't get a sufficient number of people to take part in the trial. We decided to set up a few additional requirements for participation. Among them that the candidates should have reached a certain level in oral skills that was A2 level. The reason being that chances of candidates on a beginner's level having a diagnosis were at a minimum, as at an early stage, dyslexia is so often dismissed as language difficulties or simply poor language skills. The other requirement was that the candidates should be familiar with the use of assistive technology tools before the actual test trials. But in the end, we managed to recruit very few participants. 16 altogether partook in the trials, so the quantitative results did not give us much information. We did, however, get feedback from the participants, and the qualitative results show that when the candidates were given access to digital aids, they experienced the test situation less stressful, and also they evaluated their own performance to be better when they had access to the tools. Yeah, so the trials did give us some information, but the number of participants was far too low to be a basis for any analysis. There simply aren't enough candidates in a Norwegian context, or at least we couldn't get hold of them. So decisions about what to allow further on would have to be based on professional judgment rather than results from the trials we set up. Yes, and Hanna will now take you through that part of it.
Yes, thank you, Stina. Next slide, please. Yes, so we read up on international research that we could find on the topic, and we looked into ways of amending our constructs in order to offer better arrangements for dyslexic test takers. Before we go on to that, let's just look quickly at the term special arrangements, accommodation, and modification. Next slide. Several researchers make a distinction between accommodation and modification, with special arrangements as a hyponym for the two categories. Next slide. Accommodation does not impact or change the construct, while modification does. With the modification, what the test taker is tested on is different, and it affects the validity of a test score or a test assessment. Next slide. So our special arrangements are limited to the test-taking situation. It's not in the assessment or scoring process. It's something that happens when the candidate takes a test. And our guideline is to always strive towards all kinds of accommodation as long as it's practically possible. Modification, on the other hand, will normally not be offered, but can be considered in very special circumstances, and we will be getting back to that later. Next slide. So to be able to assess whether special arrangements are either accommodation or modification, the constructs must be clearly defined. And we'll have a look at the construct for the Norwegian writing test and then go to reading afterwards. Next slide. Thank you. Our old writing construct, or the construct that we have been using up until now, had clearly defined what kind of texts the candidate should be able to write, which criteria would be used in the assessment, and that writing was to be done digitally. But today, there is a range of different assistive tools for writing, and we've listed a few here on the slide. Many of them are commonly used by those struggling with dyslexia. The problem was the way the old construct was defined, it wasn't always clear whether these aids would affect the construct or not, because writing in itself wasn't clearly defined. What does writing actually entail? Which processes are involved in writing? So we are now working on a new construct, the one you see up on the slide now, and this is still a work in progress. So this is just a draft. But we are thinking to include something along the lines of the candidate's ability to produce written text in Norwegian digitally by presenting and connecting letters and punctuation marks in order to form words and text. So the focus here is on the candidate producing text. Next slide. With this included in the construct, we are proposing to distinguish between assistive technology tools which are used on the text already produced and tools that produce text for you. So if we look on the tools on the right first, tools like word prediction, that's when words are suggested based on the first letters you type, and next word prediction, when Whole words are suggested based on preceding words. Next slide. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
There, thank you. That would be modification, and the same would speech-to-text programs be. But spell check and grammar check are tools that are used on text that is already produced by the candidate. Next slide. And we therefore suggested in our discussion for the Norwegian test to label this accommodation. Before we move on, I'd just like to repeat that accommodation happens in a test-taking situation, not in the assessment. So it's not the case that by allowing spelling and grammar tools, those criteria will then be obsolete or useless. Spelling and grammar are part of our assessment criteria, and dyslexic test takers will be assessed in the same way by the same criteria as all other candidates. And using digital aids does not mean that the text will be perfect or that there is nothing to assess. Language proficiency is key to be able to make use of these tools. And we believe that spell check and grammar check can be a form of accommodation that can actually help to mitigate the difficulties a dyslexic test taker experiences in a writing test. And as you see here on the slide, screen reader is also part of the accommodation category here. We can't see that having your own text read aloud will modify the construct of the writing test. But screen readers on a reading test, that is a bit more complicated. Next slide, please. So let's go on to reading. Special arrangements for dyslexic test takers in reading tests are challenging because unlike writing tests where you have an array of different aids, for reading, there's really just one aid that is of use, and that is a screen reader. And this, we are now in the part of the presentations where we have far more questions than answers. Next slide.
Sorry, I'm coming.
A common objection to screen readers in reading tests is that this will change it into a listening test, and that is a modification because it affects the construct validity of the test. As a contrast to this objection, we would like to include this quote from Taylor and Chen. Next slide. I'll just skip to the middle of this quote. If the test taker regularly employs the services of a reader when engaging with printed text in a professional or educational context, then this is indeed how he or she reads. Now, this quote is from a paragraph concerning special arrangements for visually impaired candidates, but we think it's just as relevant for dyslexic test takers. This is how many with dyslexia read. And whether screen readers in a reading test is a modification, well, that depends on the construct. Next slide, please. So in our team, we've had long discussions about constructs versus accommodation and or modification. And in this slide, we've included some of the questions we discussed. What is reading, really? Which processes are involved? Is reading limited to visual decoding? Is reading the same now as it was 50 or even 10 years ago? Do digital texts change how we read? And can reading be different things for different people? We also spent time talking about the role of our language test in society and possible expectations that stakeholders have to the reading test and the test certificate. So yeah, I'm sure it comes as no surprise that it was a challenging discussion, and it was challenging to come to a conclusion because this touches upon so many important sides of language testing. But after much discussion, it was decided that visual or tactile decoding of letters, tactile to include Braille, that is part of our reading construct. And that would put screen readers as modification. As we said in the beginning, modification will normally not be offered, but can be considered in very special circumstances. And that's what we're going to look into now. One question we didn't mention in the last slide is perhaps the most important question. Why is reading a part of the test? McNamara and Ryan, in their paper on fairness and justice from 2011, states that the goal of language tests is to reach fair conclusions about the state of linguistic knowledge or the performance capabilities of language users, often in contexts of use relevant to decisions about test candidates. The previous slide. If the point of the reading test is to predict how well the candidate functions in a study or work situation where they have to handle written information, then the test should be as compliant as possible with the real-life situations. And we know that in Norway, many students with dyslexia, with the help of assistive technology tools, perform well in an academic setting. So if a language test is used for university entry, but the candidate doesn't get to use the aids they would normally use as a student, will the test results then be valid? Can the test conclude fairly and justly about performance capabilities when the premises are so different? Next slide, please. Equal possibilities for higher education is an important principle in a modern and fair society. And Bart Tegers, in his excellent paper on fairness and justice, summarizes literature on social justice in education with, "There is consensus that everybody has the right to equal educational opportunities and to an education that allows them to pursue valuable life goals." Without assistive technology tools, will the certificate of the Norwegian language test accurately represent dyslexic candidates' general language proficiency or performance capabilities? And compared to dyslexic students in the regular school system in Norway who are permitted assistive technology tools on exams, do dyslexic immigrants have equal opportunity to seek higher education? Tegers goes on to discuss Messick's justice, which has two components: the position of a test in a larger societal policy, but also the consequences that are attached to test scores. For dyslexic candidates, not to be allowed screen readers can have major consequences. Next slide, please. Skills Norway's social mission in is lifelong learning for an inclusive economy and society. Education is no longer something that just precedes our professional life. Education is something that will occur throughout our careers, lifelong learning. And this has become even more apparent with the COVID pandemic. We've seen how quickly the need for different competences arise and how flexible and willing employees and job seekers have to be to seek further education or to retrain. And talking about consequences attached to test scores, the Norwegian language test is a high-stakes test. It's used for university entry and often when applying for jobs. Without assistive technology tools, are we shutting the door for these candidates' chance to succeed in society? Next slide. If so, this could affect the test's validity negatively. So even though screen readers do impact the construct of our reading test as it is defined today, the role of the test in our society is so important and the potential consequences for candidates so big that we decided not to discard the use of screen readers. So we have therefore decided that for a trial period of 2 years, dyslexic candidates can apply to use screen readers as well as the aforementioned tools for writing in real tests. We didn't get enough candidates for the trials mentioned at the beginning, but to open up for use in real tests will hopefully give us much more information than we managed to get in those trials where the results didn't count. So we will gather feedback from the candidates and other stakeholders as well, and make final conclusions after the trial period. So we have now shared with you the important aspects of amending special arrangements regulations. Obviously, every test is different and every context is different. So what's right for the Norwegian language test isn't necessarily a good solution for other tests. But we hope that this has been interesting for you and maybe even food for thought. And please do not hesitate to grab hold of us in a break. We would love to hear from our international colleagues on these matters. Thank you for listening.
Great, thank you so much, Hannah and Stina. Really, really interesting and fascinating work that is happening at Skills Norway in this area. So yeah, unfortunately, we don't have time to take any questions now, but as Hannah said, please do grab them in a break, go and find them or contact them after this event has finished to continue that discussion. So we come to our next session. There's nothing happening on stage now, so please decide if you want to go to room 1 for GDPR and auto marking, or room 2 talking about how we can give teachers a hand, how we can help teachers as language testers through this current situation. So let's see you in either room 1 or room 2 in a minute's time. Thanks very much.
Good afternoon, everybody, or nearly good afternoon, everybody. We are heading into our next sessions. In room 1, we have GDPR and auto marking, and in room 2, let's give teachers a hand. So please do make your way to room 1 and room 2, where sessions are about to begin. Thank you.